Hello and welcome to What's Sizzlin, the podcast that covers all things marketing. We have new guests each episode from companies covering all verticals. As always, I'm your host, Mitch Levinson with Creative Sizzle, and I have Lauren with me today, Lauren Pond. Hi, Lauren.
Hi, Mitch. Thanks for having me.
Yep, and on this week's episode, we're going to talk with Julia O'Connor with Creative Sizzle. We're going to talk about blogging and best strategies. So, Lauren, it's always great to talk about blogging and to talk with Julia about best strategies for blogging. I'm really excited about this show.
Yeah, I am too. She really knows how to put out good content and engaging content for our readers and our clients' readers.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We're going to talk about the top strategies to look at. So there's several of them, and obviously it starts with creating the right content itself and how do you know what the right content is. We're going to really talk about that. We're going to talk about creating that editorial calendar and the strategy for it. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how to get that content read and what kind of keywords are involved with it and how do we know if it's working and if people are consuming it. And then how do we take that blog content and syndicate it through social media. So I'm really excited about today's show.
Yeah, this is really going to be a good one. Julia works very hard to make sure that she puts the content out that the client wants. I mean, she really listens to what the client is looking to gain from any content that they put out. So that helps her with creating the editorial calendar and the engaging content that she puts on social media and on their websites.
Yeah, and it's great to see when we look through the tracking reports, because you and I spend a lot of time with clients and in our own tracking report, looking at how much traffic reads that content, how much traffic is looking at that content, and the decisions that we make based on the editorial calendar for what kind of content that people really like and what the client thought it was going to be, or what's the difference between what it is or what it was, or is their target market really looking at what they're looking at. It's so exciting to see when we think something's going to happen and then it happens the way we thought, or it's slightly different, or it's completely different. It's really exciting when we're looking at that as it relates to content, because right now content is king. And whether it's with written content, which is what we're talking about today, or visual content or video, or, it's really exciting to talk about, how we help create the story that is the brand for not only ourselves but our clients.
Right, and it's important to see what, as you said, take a lot of time to look at tracking reports that tell us what are the top blog posts. We can see what's coming in from social media to make sure that people are engaging. And, with the trends that are always changing, Julia is really good at staying on top of the new trends. Like video content is a new trend that is coming up. And it's just good to see all that different content in writing and learning about it as well.
Yeah, and not only video, but drone video and getting that 30,000 foot perspective of it. It's a great metaphor. So if you're listening today and you really need to have a good 30,000 foot perspective of what your content is, what your story is, what your brand is, and you don't really have that, stay tuned, because we're going to offer something to you at no cost that is really going to help get you headed in the right direction. And if you're working on a team, rowing in the same direction, something that's going to resonate with not only you and your company, but also your target market. And it's going to help you define who your target market is. It's going to help you understand if the target market is correct, if you're really targeting the right people or the right content. And we're really going to offer you something at the end that's going to be great, because it's the first step in every process. And so many companies that try to do it themselves leave this first step out. And if you're sitting there thinking, well, I think it's working well, but I'm really not sure, and I'm kind of writing something when I think of something to write, stay tuned, because we're going to help you work smarter and not harder, and we're going to help you come up with a strategy that not only will you think it works, but you're going to see it working in your traffic report. So I'm really excited about talking about content and blogging with Julia today.
What's kind of fun is that she also has her drone driving license, which is so cool, because I've never known anybody who actually knows how to use a drone. So, she's a jack of all trades.
Yeah, so is that really what it's called? Is it a drone driving license, or is it a flying license?
I don't know what it is. We'll have to ask her. That'll have to be a good question to ask her.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, because you put something up that high in the air and it's going to interfere with airplanes, I guess. I wonder when she goes out and takes some drone footage of neighborhoods or warehouse buildings or whatever. I wonder if she needs to log a flight plan.
Right. That's a good question. We'll have to ask her, because drones are the new thing. People like to use them. So we have to pick her brain about her drone usage.
Yeah, definitely kind of cool. So when we return from the break, we're going to be back with Julia O'Connor. So stay tuned. Are you having credit problems, or are you looking for someone to help you improve your credit score? Contact John Wilkinson with CreditSolutionProblems.org. John is very versed and understands exactly what needs to be done in order to improve your credit score, get your credit back in line, and if you are looking to help people after the pandemic get back on track, John would be willing to work with you and your donation so that you can help those that really need it. Visit creditproblemsolved.org or call 866-850-9360. And now, let's get back to the show. Welcome back to What's Sizzlin, the podcast that talks about all things marketing. And with us today, we have Julia O'Connor. We're going to talk about blogging and content. And we, before we went to the break, I want to clear something up. Lauren and I were having a conversation about what the license is actually called for when you take drone footage, and what is the actual license called?
So you go and you get your FAA drone commercial certification license.
Yeah,
not really a drone flying or a drone driving license, but it's commercial use.
Yeah, so it's from the FAA, right? So you have to really know what you're talking about and not interfere with planes and helicopters and the FAA, right?
So the night before I took my drone cert test, I called my uncle, who is a plane pilot, and asked him, because you have to read like these pilots' maps. I mean, you have to know distance and from buildings and towers and all these. It's a ton of stuff. It's much harder than you would think it would be.
Yeah, no, definitely kind of cool. But so how high up does the drone go?
Oh gosh, it can go really high. The standard, from what I remember, is you have to be 500 feet below clouds. So if it's a super cloudy day, but it's still nice and not windy, you can fly, but you have to be 500 feet below the cloud surface, and then you have to be about 400 feet above the tallest object you're flying over. So it's a lot of math.
Interesting. Yeah, so I think that's great. All right, so we're obviously on a tangent right now, not really talking about blogging and content. So let's get back to business, and we'll talk a little bit about blogging and content and stuff like that. And the key to the show today, or the opening, the hook, is what are some best practices? What are some best strategies for blogging? When I was teasing the intro to the show, we talked about, how does someone get started? Let's say that they've never done blogging before, they've never produced content before, and they are doing it now, but they're kind of flying by the seat of their pants, and they have something to write. That's when they write about it. What would the first step be to putting together a smart program so that they can work smarter and not harder? What is that first step to success for blogging or content?
For me, that is the editorial calendar. You have got to put together a schedule so that, like you were saying, Mitch, it's hard for people to pay attention to your blog if it's not very consistent and if they don't know when you're going to be posting something. So having that really consistent, maybe it's a weekly blog or twice a week, however you want to do it. Maybe it's once a month. But having that kind of consistency is super important for making sure that your audience knows when you're going to be producing content.
Yeah, so it's great, but the editorial calendar isn't really just the time that you're going to post and the schedule. Talk a little bit more about, the makeup of what an effective editorial calendar contains.
Right. So it's also, besides just having your timeline spelled out, it's also really good for getting your ideas and what you're going to be writing about. And there's so many things that you can look at when you're coming up with topics. There's things that are happening in the world. There's what's trending right now, especially in your industry. There's holidays. I mean, there's so many things that you can really use to draw to make up that content calendar. So there's a ton of different examples. When you have like a ton of thoughts in your head and you're going like 100 miles an hour and then you can't keep up. That's right now.
Yeah, well, that's good because, that's really what creating an editorial calendar does. So when we first start and we create editorial calendars, we kind of narrow it down a little bit to the buckets, right? So it depends on the kind of client we have, what kind of content are we going to deliver, right? So if we have whether it's a home builder or a remodeler and they're in the real estate space, or whether it's a warehouse and they're selling widgets and they're e-commerce, whatever the kind of content is, they always have a bucket.
Right.
And so what kind of bucket do they have? Is it product related? Is it lifestyle related? Is it event related? Is it holiday related? Is it educational related? Do it yourself? What kind of bucket are we creating? And then within that bucket, we have topics. So if it's an event, Are they delivering a webinar, or are they attending a trade show, or is it a holiday that we're going to try to get something about? If it's the education bucket, what are we trying to teach them? What is it that they want to know? Is it, if it's a product, that's easy. They have different categories of products, right? Is it a widget that flies, or is it a widget that walks, or is it a widget that you wear? So we create these buckets, and then in the bucket we put the topics, and then now we have this list of topics in the bucket, and we can look at the schedule to determine when we're going to publish that content. So it's really important to take that first step. And if you take that first step and if you plan it out on a schedule, it becomes easier to control. You can pre-write everything and publish it on a schedule. So it's really cool how we do that.
Right. You know what? I think it's interesting because as you're talking about all of that, I'm thinking about some of our clients and some of the recent work that I've done. And we've got like the pandemic right now. So some of our clients, especially some of our like home building and those construction kind of clients. So the pandemic is one thing, and we can certainly write blog posts about, how the pandemic affects the home building schedule, or about how it affects like working from home and having to have that kind of home office. But we also can take it even more granular than that and say, okay, well, what can you do as a DIY in your home? Because people right now, as a result of the pandemic, they have a lot more time. They're spending it at home, and they're looking around their environment, and they're saying, oh, wow, I'm bored. I've seen these walls every day for the past year, and nothing's changed, and I'm ready for a remodel. And so, like even taking it granular like that to that kind of level, it's kind of fun to be able to really dive into some topics in depth and get some good results from that. And that's what people are interested. They want to know how to do those projects, or who they can turn to have some ideas and tips for those kinds of things.
So a lot of her clients are consuming the content as it relates to, what kind of organization do I need? Is it my pantry? Is it my kitchen? Is it my playroom? What kind of organization do I need? And how do I do it so that it makes the most sense? After being locked in your house for a year and now finally getting out, it's not uncommon that people are trying to clean up their act, right? So organize things a little bit better. So we have an organizer that her content is a lot about not the pandemic, but what the pandemic is making people think about. We also did a podcast with a company that works with event management, and they're kind of B2B, and they work with associations and they work with large companies, and they plan trade shows or events. And it's any kind of event. It's either, an educational event, and it's a 1 day, it's a half a day, it's a 3-day trade show. They do all the schedule and coordination for an event. And now post-COVID, the event industry is upside down, right? So,
Right.
So is it only going to be in person from this point forward, like it was previously to that? Is there going to be some hybrid because people want to get back in person, but some people want to still do things by Zoom? And there's a lot of content that can be created about your business, regardless of whether it's B2B or B2C. How do you look at it and create it in a way that it's in a bucket, it's scheduled, but more importantly, it's being consumed by your target market?
Yeah, I think that's huge. And that's kind of a good segue into even talking about, analyzing your analytics is kind of huge when you're coming up with some of those topics for your upcoming editorial calendar timeframe. So I know like Lauren and I will have conversations for both internally and for our clients, and that'll kind of guide my decisions sometimes in adding certain topics to my editorial calendar. So if something is, performing really, really well, especially those things that we've, they're from like 2 years ago, but they're doing really well right now, that's usually a pretty good indicator that that's a topic that I'm going to want to write about and, kind of revamp and retouch on.
It's interesting you bring up that traffic report, and you bring up, something that we're monitoring it so that we know it's getting a lot of traffic right now. Mm-hmm. When you tie that into your overall marketing strategy and you see something that's being consumed, that's when you run some AdWords against it and see it go a little bit viral. That's when you run some Facebook ads against it and see it go a little bit viral. When people are starting to consume it, that's when you support it in a way that makes a difference from an overall marketing standpoint. But again, it all starts with that editorial calendar, and it all starts with working it that way. So Julia, tell me what would another best practice be for people delivering content or blogging? What is another tip for best practice on top of the editorial calendar?
So on top of that, I would say like pay attention to those keywords and make sure that you're putting them in the entire blog. So in the heading, in the title, in your subheadings, in the actual content, you really want to make sure that you're naturally incorporating those keywords. And what I mean by that is that it doesn't sound forced or choppy. You want it to flow. You want it to sound organic, and you want it to be incorporated nicely so that, you know, your search engines are going to recognize it in a positive way instead of kind of taking you down for it.
It's interesting, you know, for me personally, I have a hard time starting with a list of words and writing an article that includes those words. What I have an easier time doing is starting with the topic, writing the article about the topic, and then going back after and looking at the words that I want to use and editing the story so that I can add some of those words or words that are similar in a way that makes the most sense. Because that's, for me, it's easier for me to do that, and it's easier for me for that to make the most sense. And, you know, I want people to consume it, and I want them to read it. I want it to make sense to the person, but at the same time, I want Google to pick it up so that Google ranks it and puts it in the index. So that's a great tip. Use those keywords in the title, in the content, but make sure you write a good article and the article has good keywords.
Right. The other thing I think that's really important is when you're adding categories, so you can, you know, put blogs under certain categories on your website. And so what we've done is, like, we have our four main, you know, pillars of business. We've got brand strategy, lead generation, and lead capture. And so what we've done is we've made sure that those are category options for all of our blogs to fall under. So that way you're also, you know, again, reinforcing those keywords. And not only are they visible in your blog, but they're also going to be visible on your website. So you're really going to be able to get that like double whammy. And then Google is going to prioritize you a little bit higher if you do that.
Yeah, and that's a great point, right? So who you are, what your brand is, that needs to flow through everything that you do. And that's why the brand needs to tell your story. The story needs to be visible in your content. The content is what gets you indexed. And by getting indexed, you're going to drive traffic. So it's all connected. You can't really look at your marketing program as if it were a silo. It's got to be all tied together in a way that makes the most sense. So Julia, this has been a great episode. And before we go to break, is there anything else you want to add about anything? I mean, these were great tips. When we come back from break, we're gonna talk about, you know, the special or the incentive that we're gonna offer for those listeners that are interested in getting that kickstart or update of what their content program is. But any last minute tip or other things that we should give out to people today?
Yeah, hot little sizzling tip here. Go ahead and promote your blogs across all your platforms. So go on social media, really share those, you know, those blog contents. You can do a post on your Instagram and then do a story and kind of preview it. Give it a little bit of a sizzle and say new post, and then really kind of get that attention to your blog content. That'll be huge.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. It's a great last tip. People sometimes run their social media, but they don't link back to their website, or they don't link out to something else. That's what's important. You know, don't run your Facebook program just in Facebook. Get them to come back to your website so that they can fill out your form and contact you or make a phone call. I mean, you want them to comment and like on Facebook and all that. I'm not saying that's not important, but get them to your website so that you can capture them and remarket to them. That's what's important. So those are 3 really good tips for today. So when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about what we can do or what you can do for free to help you with creating effective content.
Perfect. Thanks for having me, Mitch.
This episode is brought to you by awesome employers that let you bring your pets to work every single day. In fact, while we're all still working remote or haven't gone back after the pandemic, you are your own boss. So here's to you, Dexter, for interrupting all of my Zoom calls and making sure people know you are in the background. Welcome back to What's Sizzlin, the podcast about all things marketing. So Lauren, that was a great episode with Julia. We got 3 real good tips for our listeners. What did you think about it?
I thought it was great. You know, you could tell she really loves to put out the content and the blogging and knows social media. Those were really great tips at the end that I think she reminded people that don't always remember those things to do.
You can always tell when we have a guest that is passionate about what they do, is really excited and into what they're good at, and Julia's definitely good at content. And as far as creating and setting up the editorial calendar, for any of our listeners, if you are interested in just starting out or revisiting what you've done so far and you want us to help you set up or create an editorial calendar with you from the very beginning, talk a little bit about what's on that editorial calendar, help you define what your buckets are, and maybe come up with some initial topics for content and stuff like that. We are happy to help you set up and create an editorial calendar at no cost. Mention this podcast and we're willing to do that. Julia would love to do that. She enjoys doing it and she would love to do that with you, and we can certainly help you with that.
Yes, she would be really great at that.
And with that, we appreciate you listening today. Thanks for joining us for another episode of What's Sizzlin'. Head on over to iTunes or wherever you're getting this podcast from to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It really helps out the show. As always, if you'd like more information about today's guest, becoming a guest yourself, or if you need marketing support, all of that can be found at creativesizzle.com/what's sizzlin'. Thanks again. I'm Mitch Levinson.
And I'm Lauren Pond.
And we'll see you next time.